Hello, and welcome to the Castle Talk podcast, where we talk to writers and creators of today's genre worlds. From Denver, Colorado, I'm your host, Jason Henderson, author of the upcoming series Young Captain Nemo from Fievel and Friends Macmillan Books. Tonight, Midnighters is a layered, enigmatic thriller set in the Gothic backwoods of New England, where a young couple's marriage faces the ultimate test after they cover up a terrible crime and find themselves entangled in a Hitchcockian web of deceit and madness. The movie is the theatrical debut of director Julius Ramsay, known for his work on The Walking Dead and the upcoming Syfy Superman prequel Krypton. It was written by his brother Alston Ramsay, who was inspired to write it after reading that disturbing story from a year or so ago about the woman who drove home with somebody she ran into stuck in her windshield and kept him in her garage. The movie Midnighters premieres Friday, March 2nd on VOD and in theaters in LA, New York, and elsewhere. Julius and Austin, I really appreciate you being here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having us, Jason. We're thrilled to be here.
Okay, so I want to ask you a little bit about Midnighters. Julius, you're the director. Austin, you're the writer. So the first thing that I want to understand is you've made a big deal about the fact that this story is inspired by that true story. So I'm just curious, as a writer, when you come upon a piece of news, you're reading the newspaper, you come upon a piece of news. What happens to make you go, well, I could turn this into an actual filmable story?
Well, with that story in particular, I think it was just something that stuck in my mind. Now, unless it happened twice, the one that we were thinking of was actually, at this point, it was probably 8 or 9 years ago, and we were trying to come up with an idea for a film we could make. At that point, I think it was 4 or 5 years previously. And for me, I have a background in journalism. I started my career as a magazine editor, so I read a lot of long-form journalism, and sometimes there's just something that sticks in your head for whatever reason as searing. Sometimes it's for the good, sometimes it's for the bad. In this case, it was just such a horrific story, and it raised
Yeah.
this question to me of presumably someone who is an upstanding person. I believe she was a nurse, in some extraordinary circumstance where she's making some really amazingly terrible decision to disastrous consequences. And what's the humanity that leads to that happening? So the story was kind of a seed in that sense, and then from there it was sort of exploring those themes and going in the direction, okay, what would make this into an actual story? The story didn't spring to mind from that article in particular. It's more of these other questions that it raised that, the questions aren't answered because, no one was there in those 24 hours to see, like,
Right.
why is this person making these terrible decisions?
Your story winds up being about a married couple. How did this story come together? And I'm also curious, like, whether Austin, whether you wrote the story first and then went to your brother, or whether we're talking about you guys hanging out in a hotel room and eating tacos and coming up with a story. Like, how did this happen?
We're probably eating some tacos at the time. I had come out to LA to visit Jute. It was a few months before I actually moved there. He's lived there for a long time. And so, I was literally sleeping on a sofa, and we were trying to come up with an idea for a movie for when I moved. And it was always going to be a joint project where I would write it and he would direct it. So, the genesis was we were working together on an idea that we both liked. And then once we had this sort of kernel of an idea, we sat there in his living room, and we had a bulletin board. And really, I think a lot of it was speaking in the shared languages of movies that we had, other movies we liked, and sort of breaking down, well, how many characters were there? What were the relationships among those characters? How did those relationships change as the film evolved? And trying to figure out, well, because with a movie, there's a million directions you can go, and so you have to make some decisions, and you need to make some informed decisions.
Yeah.
So it's really sitting there and talking through what are the dynamics. And, there were also Jute's sensibilities as a director. What's the story he wants to tell? How's it going to feed into, the style and what it is he wants to actually see on screen? So we kind of broke the story and outlined a lot of it, and then I went and did the first draft of the script, and then there were a number of rounds of notes from there.
Was this just doing a spec script in a vacuum, or did you have some plan
It
on
was.
how you were going
Yeah,
to?
it was doing a spec script. It was definitely doing a spec script in a vacuum, with the hope that we could make it. But we did it deliberately. It was written to be shot at a lower budget, so we knew that, if we failed to get
like a bigger budget or like a larger studio entity or whatever involved with it, that we could go out and presumably do it on the cheap ourselves, which is what we wound up doing.
What kind of choices go into that? Like if I say to you, hey, I have an idea for a drama that's going to involve people fighting and a dying guy in a garage or whatever, how do we make sure that something doesn't spin out of control budget-wise? If you're a writer listening to this conversation and they go, well, yeah, I'd like to write something that could be done, for a price. What does that mean? What are the choices you have to make along the way?
Yeah, I mean, this is I think when you look at the classic cases are horror films that all take place in a single house. And the real constraints you would want to put up is, you say, limited locations and limited characters, right? So you want the vast majority of the film to take place in one location. That's why a lot of horror films take place in a haunted house, because it's one location. And when you're not moving, you aren't wasting as much time on set, which allows you to shoot the film in a fewer number of days. Cast-wise, you can't have a giant, massive cast, because, the more cast there is, the more you have to pay for cast, plus you have to put them up, plus you have to fly them somewhere or train them depending on where you're shooting. Because if you're going to do a film like this, you're going to save a lot of money not shooting in Manhattan, for instance, because, just the location alone would cost you a tremendous amount of money. So those are the main constraints. It's your cast, and then, I guess special effects would be another one, and then scenes that have full or, an exterior scene in Manhattan is going to be problematic, because you have to shut down a Manhattan street, and the city of New York will charge you, probably what it cost us for a whole day of shooting to do that.
No kidding. You beat the script out ahead of time before writing it. Again, I like to ask these questions that are very, very much oriented towards, a writer or a young director, somebody in film school who might be listening. Do you just sort of know this stuff off the top of your head, or are there any books that you've gone by? Like, are you a Vogler kind of person? Do you follow all that, or you just kind of know, I know how a story goes together?
Yeah, I mean, with the story, I grew up loving film in general, and that's an influence due to my older brother. So just grew up watching movies because he loved movies and he went into the business first. I was a speechwriter, so I loved the craft of writing. And as a hobby, I started reading screenplays. I read books about screenplays. So Vogler and, Robert McKee's The Godfather of all, and Save the Cat. Some people dismiss it. I think it's, if you're only going to read one book and it's just a hobby, I think it's a great breezy read that's got some very smart, basic structural things. So I read all the books and I read a lot of screenplays. And, the other thing I did was I would have a screenplay up on my computer in front of me as I'm watching a film and kind of reading along just to understand, there's a vernacular and a way of describing stuff on the page that translates to how you sort of see it on screen. And it's useful to understand that, because if you're someone younger getting into the business, you want it to be written in the same way that all the professionals that read 10, 15 scripts a day and breeze through them, you want it to not stand out as something that reads as off, like someone who doesn't know what a professional screenplay looks like and how certain things are described and what's included and then a lot of what's not included.
I've often heard people complain and go, I read this and clearly this person doesn't know what he's doing, or this story focuses on a married couple that find them in this situation. Tell me about how it gets more complicated from the situation that we see in the trailer.
Jeff and Lindsay are a not so happily married couple with a few cracks in their marriage that wind up hitting and killing a man on their way home from New Year's Eve, quite near their house, only to discover that the man was carrying a gun and a piece of paper with their home address on it. So the rest of the film kind of becomes a mystery, trying to determine who he was, why he was coming after them, and what this is all about. Like why there's a man with a gun coming to their house to try to kill someone. And so, there's also Lindsay's younger sister is staying with them for the holidays. So it's really the three of them are the three primary characters, and then we introduce some antagonists later on. But it kind of there's a plot twist, I'd say, every 10 to 15 minutes.
I love it. And that's why you call it Hitchcockian, is how things continue to sort of fold in and change the perspective of what you're looking at. Wonderful. Okay, well, the movie is Midnighters. It is a very tense thriller. It's coming out on the 2nd of March, which is Friday, if you're listening to this the week that we're recording it. Available on VOD and in select cities like LA and New York. Julius and Alston, I am so thankful that you would speak with me, and I hope you have fantastic luck with it.
Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure to speak with you, and everybody can go to midnightersfilm.com. That'll have links to where you can find the movie.
Thank you very much.
Yes, and I also love this conversation, and I forgot to point out, it will be playing in Denver at the Film Center starting on March 9th.
The C Film Center on Colfax.
So it's opening there on the 9th. So I think that'll be a week from Friday that it'll open there.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thank you very much for letting me know. And I wish you guys all the best. Have a fantastic evening.
Okay, thank you so much. We enjoyed it.